largely leading to the large brewers on a national scale with money and resources to owning a local monopoly on alcohol. Hi, so I'm Jake from Coming Whiskey. So most of you may know me from Instagram as Coming Whiskey. So every morning I raid the public domain federal TTB website and I download the more interesting American whiskey labels that are coming to market in the next few weeks and months, and I let you know where your dollars are going in the near future. So I get excited about it too. More recently, I have started doing spirits reviews and book reviews for Drink Hacker, and I'm also a brand ambassador for Pursuit United. It's a great whiskey. I truly believe in it. Now, I love doing the TTB labels. I love sampling whiskey, but my big passion is whiskey history and books about American beverage alcohol history. At the moment, I'm 5 books away from hitting 500 completed books. I love it. So through all of this, one thing that I've learned is that whiskey history isn't whiskey history. Whiskey history is simply history. It is American history. It is world history. You cannot separate the two. To gain the full scope of American history and whiskey history, or American history and world history, you have to talk about how alcohol has impacted that. One of the stories that I like to tell is we all know the Pilgrims. They landed at Plymouth Rock. What we don't talk about in elementary school is that Plymouth Rock was not the original destination for the Pilgrims to land. Why they got off the boat at Plymouth Rock, it was early, because they ran out of beer. Yeah, we're not going to talk about that with third graders in school as we're making construction paper turkeys, are we? So at that point in history, we used barrels to transport things. For a transatlantic boat trip, if you filled a barrel with water, what's going to happen over months and months? That water is going to spoil, be contaminated, not safe to drink. What is safe to drink? Barrels of beer. They ran out of beer. They had to get off the boat to drink, to find something to drink. We don't learn that in school. So that's what has caught my attention, is how beverage alcohol history has shaped American history. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3-tier system of distribution and the historical origins of that. I think it's pretty interesting. If you're not familiar with the 3-tier system, the 3-tier system says that we have 3 branches of alcohol distribution. We have the production, such as your wineries, your breweries, and your distilleries. You have the distribution, and then you have the retail, such as your bars, your restaurants, and your liquor stores. Now, the 3-tier system says that you cannot own or have an interest in more than one of those. So if you own a distillery, you are not allowed to own a liquor store. If you own a brewery, you cannot own distribution. One of the examples of that is Ken Lewis with New Riff Distilling. Prior to owning and launching New Riff Distilling, Ken Lewis owned the Party Source in northern Kentucky, one of the absolute largest liquor stores in America. When Ken Lewis wanted to open New Riff Distilling, he had to sell his interest in the Party Source, and he sold it to his employees because he was not allowed to own both. Now, in the modern day, what's the benefit of the 3-tier system? So it offers a system of checks and balances to make sure that all necessary laws and regulations get followed. And it also ensures that all necessary taxes get paid on alcohol, which those taxes on alcohol go to fund local education, fund infrastructure, and just generally benefit the community in general. But the most important aspect of the 3-tier system is that it provides public safety and public health by trying to reduce practices that encourage overconsumption. Now, this system of the 3-tier system has been in place since 1934, and not a whole lot has changed with the 3-tier system since 1934. Now, today, in 2024, we might think the 3-tier system needs to be scrapped. We might think it needs to be amended. It has some problems. Maybe it's not relevant anymore. But in 1934, coming out of Prohibition, it was highly relevant. There were reasons that the 3-tier system went into place in 1934, so let's talk about some of that today. So we're going to start with the understanding of the pre-Prohibition saloon model. So today we talk about bars. Before Prohibition, from the late 1800s going to 1920, the saloon model was quite different than our bar system is today. And it's important to understand what the saloon meant to culture in that time. The saloon was in existence when TVs didn't yet exist. Prohibition launched in 1920. the television did not exist until 1927. If you wanted information on sports, you couldn't turn on the TV to watch Sports Center. You couldn't go to Google or Twitter to follow your sports. There was no place in your home that you could get information about sports. If you wanted to know what news was going on in your community or your home, you couldn't sit on your couch at night and turn on your favorite news station. That wasn't possible yet. So the Saloon served as a social hub or a communication hub. It was a place in the community where you could go to learn about your favorite sports team and talk sports. It was a place where you could go to talk news locally and nationally with people in the community and learn stuff that you weren't going to get at home. It was a place where political parties met to strategize and talk politics and develop policy. It was a place where unions would meet to organize. It was a socialization hub. So the Saloon in pre-Prohibition America was a civic institution. Now, with that, it's important to understand it was a civic institution for men. At this point in history, women were still largely relegated to the home. Women had no place in the pre-Prohibition Saloon. Women were not welcome. This was a space meant for men when I say that it was a civic institution. So that's a very important aspect to remember. So where does this problem come in? Now, pre-Prohibition saloons were largely part of what we call a tied house system. This is a system that existed in England and became very popular in the United States that largely does not exist today. What the tied house system says is that a saloon or tavern or bar had an exclusive relationship with a producer of alcohol, usually a very large national brewer, to serve only their product. So a saloon would only serve the beer of one particular very large national brewer. And what was very common was that large national brewer either outright owned the saloon itself, or they owned the property on which the saloon sat, and they leased the property to a local operator. Now, the big saloon, the big national brewers, they had the money to make this a reality. They had the money to own the land and to own the saloons. Smaller, local breweries, they didn't have that kind of money. So what ended up happening was these large national brewers kind of pushed out your local, smaller brewers, largely leading to the large brewers on a national scale with money and resources to owning a local monopoly on alcohol. And in this situation, that led to aggressive sales tactics. It led to practices that can exist in a monopoly, controlling prices, controlling inventory. And these aggressive sales tactics definitely led to overconsumption and led to overspending. At this point in history, overconsumption of alcohol among men was definitely an epidemic in America at this time. And again, these were men. These were men in the saloons, not women. What this led to was men spending inordinate amount of time at the saloons rather than at home with their family and taking care of their wife and kids. It also led to overconsumption, which meant that husbands often went home intoxicated, and abuse of wives and children was very common. That was a problem. Now keep in mind, at this point in American history, women didn't have a lot of rights. They couldn't vote. It was very hard for them to own property. Work options were very limited to them. They were not yet allowed to take out a loan or have a line of credit. So leaving an abusive relationship was not really a possibility. They were forced financially to stay in situations that were not good for them. This was a very bad situation. Now we talk about the aggressive sales tactics. You may have heard the phrase, there is no such thing as a free lunch. This dates back to the tied house saloon model, where these saloons would offer very cheap and low quality, but free food to the patrons of their saloons just to keep them there, so that they didn't have to leave, so they could eat. To make it worse, they would often include very salty foods such as peanuts and pretzels and salted fish, which when you eat salted food, what do? You want to drink more. So these were predatory, aggressive tactics that had a very negative effect on American society and culture. Now, the saloon was largely seen as the villain in pre-Prohibition America. And the AntiSaloon League formed in 1893 in Oberlin, Ohio. And it was largely run by a man named Wayne Wheeler. To this day, Wayne Wheeler is still arguably the most influential and powerful lobbyist United States politics has ever known. And Wayne Wheeler is largely responsible for Prohibition. He actually wrote the Prohibition Amendment himself. But Wayne Wheeler and the AntiSaloon League, they never targeted drinking itself. They never wanted to make it illegal to drink alcohol. They wanted to make it illegal to sell alcohol. They saw the saloon model as a scourge on America, and they wanted to get rid of the saloon model. Now, the AntiSaloon League didn't jump straight to federal prohibition. They chose to go with what we call local option. They wanted to have referendums at local levels, cities, counties, states, to make it illegal to sell alcohol in your local community. And it was so popular that by 1913, over 50% of America was under some type of local option prohibition on the sale of alcohol. So when federal prohibition hit in 1920, most of America was already under some type of local option alcohol prohibition. So federal prohibition hit in 1920. Now, we all know federal prohibition, it didn't work. By the early 1930s, it became very clear that prohibition was failing. It became very clear by the early 1930s that repeal was coming. Enter John D. Rockefeller, of that family, that Rockefeller family. Going into Prohibition, John D. Rockefeller is a very wealthy, influential businessman. He was a big supporter of Prohibition because he believed that workers who were sober were more industrious and more profitable. But when John D. Rockefeller was very aware of the fact that Prohibition was failing and that repeal was coming, in 1933, he commissioned a report, a study, to figure out, knowing that alcohol is coming back, what is the best way to do this? If we are going to legally reintroduce alcohol sales into American culture, how do we do this the best way possible? And that report that he commissioned in 1933 was published in a book called Toward Liquor Control. I've read it. It's about $15 online if you're interested in it. So this book, Toward Liquor Control, is quite possibly the most influential book that has shaped modern alcohol policy, with the exception of the Christian Bible. So this book came out in 1934, and it is still very influential today. Reading through this book, it outlines a proposal for the license state and the control state model that we still use today. It also very clearly outlines the three-tier system of distribution that we use today. So it is indeed a very influential book that came out in 1934, and not a whole lot has changed since 1934, largely outlined based on this report that was commissioned by John D. Rockefeller. So today, we might want to argue that the three-tier system, it's outdated, it's antiquated, changes might need to be made, but in 1934, it was highly relevant. That tied house system was dependent upon a producer of alcohol being able to own the retail. That was the tied house system that legitimately caused a lot of problems in American history and did need to go. Today, we don't have that system anymore. So for all the faults that the three-tier system might have in 2024, it was indeed highly successful at getting rid of the tied house system and the fact that the producer of alcohol could own the retail and engage in predatory and aggressive practices that absolutely needed to go. So that's a little bit of a history on the three-tier system. So follow me on Instagram, Coming Whiskey, and if you want to talk books and history, hit me up. I'm happy to talk with anyone who cares. Thanks so much.